Hashtag the HOA President cut the lock on my private road. Hashtag Chapter 3. The offer hidden behind the road for a long moment. Neither of us spoke. Richard Collins rested the master development plan across the hood of his SUV, while the morning breeze lifted one corner of the drawing. The boulevard wasn't the only thing that caught my attention. A roundabout sat exactly where my grandfather's pond reflected the sunrise every morning. My workshop had been replaced with a landscaped entrance plaza. The old oak tree beside Mercer Lane no longer existed. Someone had erased 3 generations of my family's life with a few colored lines on glossy paper. Richard noticed my eyes following the map. "It isn't finalized," he said smoothly. "It looks pretty final to me. It's only conceptual." So was Rebecca's emergency access road. He smiled politely. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding between you and the homeowners association." "I don't. Our company isn't interested in conflict." "Then why are your survey flags on my property?" His smile faded just enough for me to notice. "I'll have to ask our engineering department about that." "You should." He folded his hands. "Mr. Mercer, may I explain why I'm here?" "You've got 2 minutes." He nodded. Cedar Hollow has become one of the fastest-growing communities in this part of the county. I've noticed. The existing entrance was designed for fewer than 100 homes. I've noticed that too. We've identified an opportunity to improve traffic flow. "You mean through my land?" "We'd prefer to purchase a portion of it." There it was. The first honest sentence anyone connected to this project had spoken. "How much?" "Approximately 8 acres. I almost laughed. 8. The Western Corridor. My workshop sits in the Western Corridor. We understand. My barn too. Yes. My grandfather's pond. He hesitated. The roadway alignment could be adjusted slightly. Could it? It depends. On what? Whether we're able to reach an agreement. I folded the development plan and handed it back. There won't be one. Richard didn't seem surprised. You haven't heard our offer. I don't need to. He opened his leather portfolio and slid a sealed envelope toward me. I'd still like you to read it. I'd rather not. It contains a purchase proposal. It contains a number. Yes. My answer doesn't. He slowly took the envelope back. I expected this might happen. Then why drive all the way out here? Because people often reconsider after learning what everyone else already knows. That sentence stopped me. What does that mean? Richard glanced toward the tree line. The county is changing. It always does. Growth is inevitable. So are property rights. He looked directly at me. Sometimes standing in the way of progress becomes very expensive. The words weren't loud. They weren't angry. But they weren't a warning either. They sounded like someone repeating a conversation he'd already had many times before. I stepped closer to the gate. "Are you threatening me?" "No." "Good. I'd never do that." He slipped the proposal back into his portfolio. "I'm simply suggesting that legal disputes have a habit of costing everyone involved, especially the people who start them." He studied me for another second before closing his briefcase. "I hope you'll think carefully before making this more difficult." "I already have." He climbed back into his SUV. As the vehicle disappeared down the road, I noticed something strange. Instead of turning toward the highway, he drove directly into Cedar Hollow Estates. That afternoon I met Michael Bennett at his office. He unfolded the master plan beside the county parcel map. For nearly 10 minutes, he didn't say a word. Finally, he leaned back. "This is clever." "Clever? They're not trying to steal your land." I frowned. "Looks like they are. They're trying to convince you that selling is your best option." He pointed to the proposed boulevard. "Look here." The road entered from the dissolved North Valley parcel, crossed your property, then connected to the subdivision. "I see it. What happens if you refuse?" "They redesign it." "Exactly. So why pressure me?" Michael reached for another map. "Because redesigning costs money." "How much?" "Possibly millions." I stared at him. "The engineers have already invested months of work. The permits, the environmental studies, the traffic reports. He tapped the drawing. Every delay burns cash. So Rebecca creates pressure. The anonymous complaints, the inspection, the chain, the emergency access argument. He nodded. If you become frustrated enough, I sell. He smiled sadly. That's usually the plan. Before I left, Michael gave me one piece of advice. Stop reacting. What do you mean? So far they've controlled every move. They complain. You answer. They inspect. You respond. They send letters. You defend yourself. He folded the maps. It's time they started answering your questions. How? He slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. Across the top he wrote 3 words. Freedom of information. You don't need to guess anymore. We request records? We request everything. He began making a list. Planning emails, engineering reports, traffic studies, meeting minutes, consultant invoices, communications between the HOA and North Valley Development, environmental assessments, draft proposals, every document connected to Phase 2. If this project is legitimate, Michael said, the paperwork will tell us. And if it isn't? He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Then somebody has been very busy writing emails they never expected anyone else to read. 3 days later, my phone rang just after sunrise. It was Deputy Elena Ruiz. Morning, Jack. Everything okay? Depends. I just received a call from the county planning director. My stomach tightened. What happened? He asked whether I responded to an incident at Mercer Lane last Saturday. I told him yes. He said someone filed a complaint. Against me? No. Against me. I blinked. What for? He claims I interfered with a lawful infrastructure project. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Deputy Ruiz said something that made the back of my neck go cold. The complaint wasn't filed by the HOA. It wasn't. It was filed by North Valley Development. I looked toward the woods behind my workshop. Richard Collins hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to see whether I was willing to fight. And judging by that complaint, someone had just started the first real battle. Hashtag the HOA President cut the lock on my private road. Hashtag Chapter 4. The documents they tried to hide. Deputy Elena Ruiz's words stayed with me long after the call ended. North Valley Development had not complained about my gate. They had complained about her. Not because she had broken any law, because she had refused to let them break one. I looked across the pasture toward the tree line where the survey flags had stood only days earlier. The woods were quiet again, but the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt deliberate, as though someone had simply stepped out of sight. At 9 o'clock that morning, Michael Bennett called. I've already heard. So have they, I replied. I expected this. You did. They're changing tactics. How? They've realized the sheriff isn't going to solve this for them. So now they'll try to solve it inside an office. By noon, we sat together in Michael's conference room surrounded by maps, plats, deeds, and a growing stack of public records requests. He drew 2 circles on a legal pad. One represented the HOA. The other represented North Valley Development. Then he drew several lines connecting them. They keep insisting these are separate organizations, he said. They are. Legally, yes. He slid another document across the table. But look at the names. I scanned the list. Board member, consultant, engineer, attorney. Several names appeared twice. The same engineering firm advising North Valley had also prepared reports for the HOA. The same traffic consultant had billed both organizations. Even more interesting, Rebecca Lang had attended planning meetings months before the HOA supposedly learned about any future expansion. She knew, I said quietly. Michael nodded. I think she knew from the beginning. Late that afternoon, our first batch of public records arrived electronically. Most of it was routine. Invoices, meeting notices, engineering correspondence. Then Michael opened an email chain labeled Western Access Options. There were 37 messages. The earliest one had been sent almost 11 months earlier. Long before Rebecca first drove onto my property. Michael scrolled silently, then stopped. Jack. What? You should read this yourself. The sender was a project engineer. The recipient list included North Valley executives, 2 consultants, and Rebecca Lang. One sentence had been highlighted during the county's review process. Acquisition through voluntary purchase remains preferred. If negotiations fail, continued community access pressure may encourage cooperation. Neither of us spoke. Michael printed the page. Then another. Then another. The next email discussed increasing resident complaints regarding traffic congestion. Another suggested documenting public safety concerns. Another recommended maintaining a unified message regarding emergency access. Every event from the past month suddenly fit together. The anonymous complaints, the inspection, the contractor, the attempt to cut my lock. None of it had happened by accident. It had been discussed, planned, scheduled. Michael leaned back. This changes everything. It proves conspiracy? No. It proves coordination. He tapped the printed emails. And coordination creates questions. What kind? Questions a judge might become very interested in. Before we could continue, my phone buzzed. It was Frank Wilson. Jack. You sound out of breath. I just saw 3 trucks. What trucks? Logging trucks. My stomach tightened. Where? Near your west fence. They can't be. They are. I'm on my way. I reached Mercer Lane in less than 15 minutes. 3 heavy trucks sat beside the county road. 2 pickup trucks carried the logo of a surveying company. Several workers stood beside stacks of wooden stakes. A large bulldozer rested on a trailer. None of them had crossed onto my property. Not yet. Rebecca stood near the lead truck speaking with Richard Collins. When they saw me, the conversation stopped. I parked beside the gate and walked toward them. Afternoon, I said. Richard smiled politely. Mr. Mercer. Rebecca remained silent. I looked toward the equipment. Planning something? Richard folded his hands. We're conducting preliminary evaluations. For land you don't own? For land adjacent to future infrastructure. There is no future infrastructure. There may be. I glanced at the bulldozer. Not today. Richard looked toward the county road. We're remaining entirely off your property. So far. He nodded. So far. A white county pickup suddenly appeared around the bend. The logo on the driver's door read, County Planning and Zoning. A woman stepped out carrying a tablet. She introduced herself as Emily Carter. I received reports that survey activity was beginning here. Richard answered before I could. We're only observing. Emily looked at the trucks. With a bulldozer? No work has started. She walked slowly toward the property corner marker beside the highway. Then she frowned. Who placed these? Everyone looked where she was pointing. Fresh orange paint covered 2 boundary monuments. The original brass survey caps had almost disappeared beneath bright construction markings. Emily knelt beside one of them. Her expression changed immediately. This is a protected survey monument. Nobody answered. She brushed away loose dirt. One edge of the brass cap had been scratched by heavy equipment. She stood. Who authorized this? Silence. The survey crew looked toward Richard. Richard looked toward Rebecca. Rebecca looked at the ground. Emily removed her phone. I'm notifying the county surveyor. Richard stepped forward. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Emily's voice remained calm. Moving or damaging an official survey monument is not a misunderstanding. For the first time since this entire dispute had begun, Richard Collins stopped smiling. 30 minutes later, another county vehicle arrived. An older man climbed out carrying a metal detector, a survey rod, and a worn leather case. He introduced himself simply. Thomas Hale, county surveyor. He examined the damaged monument without saying a word. Then he slowly looked across the tree line toward my property. Finally, he turned toward Richard. Who hired this survey crew? Richard hesitated. North Valley Development. Thomas nodded once. Then he asked a question that instantly silenced everyone standing along Mercer Lane. Would someone like to explain why your preliminary survey begins almost 100 feet inside Mr. Mercer's recorded parcel? Nobody answered. Not Rebecca. Not Richard. Not even the licensed surveyor standing beside the trucks. The only sound came from the wind moving through the pine trees. Thomas opened his leather case. Inside rested a folded county survey dated 1968. He compared it with the monument at his feet. Then he looked directly at me. Mr. Mercer. Yes. I believe someone has been working from the wrong map. I expected relief. Instead, I felt something far worse. Because if they had been using the wrong map, someone had chosen it. And I had a growing suspicion that the mistake wasn't a mistake at all. Hashtag the HOA President cut the lock on my private road. Hashtag Chapter 5. The map that should never have existed. Nobody spoke after Thomas Hale's question. The county surveyor stood quietly beside the damaged monument, his weathered hands resting on the leather case that held more than 40 years of survey records. He wasn't looking at Rebecca anymore. He was looking at the licensed surveyor hired by North Valley Development. Mr. Daniels, Thomas said calmly, reading the name embroidered on the surveyor's safety vest. Would you mind showing me the control survey your crew has been working from? The younger surveyor hesitated. Richard Collins answered instead. Our engineering department prepared the working files. Thomas slowly turned his head. I wasn't asking your engineering department. His eyes returned to Mr. Daniels. I was asking the licensed surveyor whose seal will eventually appear on the final survey. For several uncomfortable seconds, nobody moved. Finally, Daniels walked to his pickup and returned carrying a weatherproof tube. He carefully removed a rolled blueprint. Thomas spread it across the hood of the county truck. I stepped closer. The drawing looked professional. Bearings, coordinates, topographic contours, drainage notes. Everything appeared legitimate, until Thomas reached the western boundary. He frowned. Then he looked at me. Jack, have you ever seen this survey before? No, you haven't. It wasn't a question. Thomas pointed to a bold red line running through my property. This boundary doesn't exist. Richard immediately stepped forward. That's our preliminary engineering alignment. Thomas didn't even look up. No. He tapped the paper with one finger. This isn't an alignment. Another tap. It's a property line. Silence settled over everyone again. Thomas reached into his leather case and removed another document. Unlike the glossy engineering print, this paper was yellow with age. The county seal dated back to 1968. He placed the two maps side by side. See this corner monument? He pointed toward the brass cap beside the road. Both surveys begin from exactly the same monument. Another tap. Then suddenly, his finger followed the modern drawing. This map shifts the western boundary 98 feet. Richard folded his arms. Perhaps the original survey contained an error. Thomas smiled politely. I helped resurvey this property in 1994. He looked directly at Richard. There wasn't. Deputy Elena Ruiz arrived just as Thomas finished speaking. She parked beside the county truck and walked toward the group. I received another call. Thomas nodded. Good timing. Ruiz looked at the maps. What did I miss? Thomas answered simply. Someone is working from a survey that doesn't match county records. Ruiz studied Richard. Is there another recorded survey? Richard adjusted his tie. Our engineers relied on information provided during due diligence. Thomas closed the map. Then your due diligence failed. Rebecca finally spoke. There must be another explanation. Thomas turned toward her. I'm listening. She looked around before answering. The developer always believed this strip belonged with the subdivision. Thomas nodded slowly. Belief isn't ownership. No, it never has been. Rebecca looked genuinely unsettled for the first time since I had met her. Not embarrassed, confused, as though she had just discovered someone else had been making decisions without telling her the whole story. Michael Bennett arrived less than 20 minutes later. I hadn't called him. Thomas had. The two men greeted each other like old colleagues. "Been a while," Michael said. "Too long." Thomas handed him copies of both surveys. Michael compared them for less than a minute. Then he quietly asked one question. "Who prepared Revision C?" Daniels looked surprised. "How did you know this was Revision C?" Michael smiled. "Because I represented another landowner against North Valley 12 years ago." Richard's expression changed. "Only slightly, but I caught it." Michael continued. "They have a habit." "What habit?" I asked. "They create multiple internal revisions before anything is submitted." He tapped the lower corner of the blueprint. "Revision C. So there were others?" "There are always others." Thomas looked toward Richard. "I'd like copies of Revision A and Revision B." Richard answered immediately. "They're internal drafts. They're evidence now. They're proprietary." Thomas folded his arms. "They became relevant the moment your crew marked county monuments." Richard's calm confidence finally cracked. "Our legal department will review any request." Michael smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." He opened his briefcase. Inside was a neatly prepared envelope. "I filed discovery preservation notices this morning." Richard stared at him. "You what?" "Every email. Every draft. Every survey revision. Every engineering memo. If any document connected to this project disappears after today." Michael closed the briefcase. "A judge will become extremely interested." Nobody noticed the white sedan until it rolled slowly onto the shoulder behind the survey trucks. An elderly man stepped out. He carried no briefcase, no clipboard, only a faded canvas satchel. Thomas looked surprised. "I didn't expect you." The old man smiled. "I heard there was confusion about one of my surveys." "You drew the original?" I asked. He nodded. "My name is Harold Whitaker." He looked toward my woods with quiet satisfaction. "I surveyed this land in the spring of 1968. I felt a chill run down my back. Harold was still alive. The man who had physically placed the original boundary monuments stood only a few feet away. He slowly walked toward the damaged survey cap. Kneeling carefully, he brushed away a little dirt with his fingertips. Then he laughed softly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Harold looked up. "Well," he pointed toward the brass monument. "This isn't the original corner." Everyone froze. "It isn't?" I asked. Harold shook his head. "No." He stood, leaned lightly on his walking stick, and looked toward the old oak tree nearly 40 yards away. "The real monument," he paused, "is still buried over there." Every person standing beside Mercer Lane instinctively turned toward the ancient oak. If Harold Whitaker was right, then every modern survey, every engineering drawing, every proposed roadway had been measured from the wrong starting point, and someone had known it.